The pristine white wedding dress dragged across the shattered glass, scattered on the road. Blood from my forehead trickled down, soaking into the fabric, mingling with the sound of blaring sirens cutting through the night. The happiest day of my life had turned into a nightmare. Somewhere in the chaos, I heard Claire screaming my name, voice hoarse with terror. And then everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw was the sterile white ceiling of an unfamiliar medical facility. My body felt like lead, every attempt to move met with sharp, tearing pain. The scars carved deep into my skin reminded me just how close I had come to death. There was no one at my bedside, no family, no familiar face, just the smell of antiseptic and the monotonous hum of the ventilator. The nurse told me I had been in a coma for 4 years. 4 years erased from existence. The world had moved on without me. My family had buried an empty coffin. My fiancée, the woman I had loved with every part of my soul, had mourned me, I was told. But where was she now? One night, I managed to retrieve my old phone, its screen cracked and nearly useless. Most of the data was gone, but fragments of recovered text messages froze me in place. Messages between Claire and Lucas. Lucas, my best friend since college. Don't let anyone find out what we did. Stick to the plan, and everything will be ours. My hands trembled as I scrolled further. A photo appeared. Claire leaning against Lucas's shoulder, smiling softly. But that smile felt like a blade carving through my chest. And then I found it. A news article. Claire Bennett and Lucas Gray announce engagement after years of overcoming tragedy together. The picture showed them standing side by side, hand in hand in elegant attire. Lucas looking at her with the same gaze he once told me he'd never feel for anyone else. The phone slipped from my hands, crashing to the floor. My chest ached, not from my wounds, but from the betrayal burning inside me. Claire, the woman I was ready to marry, the person I trusted with my life, had betrayed me. Had she and Lucas planned it from the start? Was the accident on our wedding day a setup to get me out of the way? To take my fortune, my name, and build a new life together? I had nothing left. My family believed I was gone. The love of my life now stood beside the man who had once been my closest friend. The pain was unbearable, curling inside my chest like a fire that refused to burn out. That night, I stood by the small window of my hospital room, staring at the glittering city lights in the distance. The world seemed colder than ever. But inside me, one thought, one vow solidified like iron. If Claire and Lucas chose to kill me so they could be happy together, then I will make them pay. I will take back everything they stole from me, even if it costs blood. Claire's world collapsed the day they lowered Ethan's coffin into the ground. She remembered gripping the edge of the wooden box as if her hands could keep him here. The knuckles of her fingers turning white, the muscles in her arms trembling. People had to peel her away, murmuring hollow words like, "He's in a better place," and "You'll get through this." But there was no better place, no light at the end of the tunnel. There was only a world that had been gutted of the man who made it worth living. For weeks after the funeral, Claire could not bring herself to leave the house. She wandered through the rooms of the apartment they had shared, touching the things Ethan had touched, tracing her fingertips over the books he had read, the pictures he had hung, the indentation of his head still lingering in his pillow. She slept curled on his side of the bed, clutching his shirt to her chest like it might still hold his scent. Food lost its taste. Sunlight meant nothing. Friends stopped calling when they realized Claire couldn't answer without sobbing. And then there was Lucas. He was the only one who kept showing up. He would knock on her door every other day, holding coffee or groceries, insisting she had to eat something. At first, Claire barely looked at him. Her eyes rimmed red, her voice hoarse from crying. Lucas didn't push. He simply sat with her in silence, sometimes reading aloud from a book or telling a story about Ethan, as if to keep a part of him alive. Little by little, his presence became a lifeline. Months turned into a year, then another. Claire began going outside again, first for short walks, then to work. Lucas was always there, steady, dependable. When she faltered, he steadied her. When she cried, he held her until the sobs quieted. He didn't ask for anything in return. At least, not at first. Ethan watched all of it unfold from the shadows. At first, he didn't even recognize Claire when he saw her again. She looked older somehow. Not in years, but in the way grief hollowed her out. The light in her eyes was dimmer, her smile a fragile thing she rarely offered. But what tore at him most was seeing Lucas by her side. Lucas with his arm around Claire as they walked out of her office building one evening. Lucas brushing a tear from her cheek on a park bench, his thumb lingering on her jaw. Lucas standing behind her in line at a coffee shop, leaning close to whisper something that made her nod and clutch his sleeve like she couldn't stand without him. Ethan's hands clenched so tightly, his nails dug crescents into his palms. She chose him. The thought seared through his mind, over and over. She's letting him replace me. But watching wasn't enough. The anger had to go somewhere. So Ethan began to push. The first accident was subtle. Claire's car, which had been parked in her building's garage overnight, suddenly wouldn't start one morning. The mechanic later found that the brake fluid line had been nearly severed. He chalked it up to wear and tear, but Claire's stomach twisted with unease when she drove it again. Then, 2 weeks later, a heavy box of lighting equipment fell from a rig during a company event, crashing to the ground a foot away from where she was standing. If she had taken one step to the left, it would have crushed her skull. People around her laughed it off as bad luck. Claire laughed too, but her hands trembled for hours afterward. She began to feel hunted, though she couldn't explain why. Lucas noticed. Maybe you should take time off, he told her one night, pulling her close on the couch. You've been pushing yourself too hard at work. It's not safe, Claire. Not after what happened with your car. She shook her head, clutching his arm. I can't keep hiding. I already lost Ethan. If I stop now, I'll never find a way forward. Lucas kissed her forehead. Then let me protect you. Always. The way he said it made her heart ache. For so long, she had resisted the idea of opening herself to anyone again. But Lucas was safe. He had been there when no one else was. He had held her through her worst nights and never asked for more. When he confessed he loved her 2 years after Ethan's death, tears spilled down her face. I can't, she whispered. I'll always love Ethan. I know, Lucas said softly. And I'll love you enough for both of us. She let him hold her. Ethan nearly tore the steering wheel from his car when he heard about the engagement. He had watched from a distance as Lucas drew Claire closer, weaving himself into her life. He had wanted to believe, just for a second, that maybe she was still holding on to his memory, that maybe she would see through Lucas. But when the news of their engagement broke, complete with glossy photos of Claire's tearful smile and Lucas's hand on her waist, something inside Ethan snapped. The next few weeks blurred into a haze of calculated cruelty. He hacked into Claire's work email, sending anonymous tips to upper management that made it look like she was mishandling client accounts. An internal audit was launched. Her projects were frozen. She was forced to work late nights trying to clear her name, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He orchestrated anonymous phone calls, voicemails filled with nothing but silence or the faint echo of a man's breathing. He watched her flinch every time her phone buzzed. Then came the fire alarm. Ethan waited outside her building at midnight, dressed in black, and triggered the alarm system from a hacked control box. Claire stumbled down the stairs barefoot, clutching a blanket around her shoulders, her face pale in the flashing red lights. Ethan hid behind a row of parked cars, watching her stand shivering on the sidewalk. "Do you feel it now?" he thought. His jaw clenched. The helplessness, the fear. "It's nothing compared to what you did to me." But when Claire's eyes darted around the crowd, wide with terror, searching for someone, anyone, to make her feel safe, Ethan felt a stab of something he couldn't name. One night, he followed Claire all the way to the cemetery. She stood alone by his grave, his fake grave, hands buried in the pockets of her coat, her breath visible in the cold air. "I don't know if you can hear me, Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "But I'm so tired. I keep thinking about the last thing you said to me. How you promised we'd always be together. And I don't know why you left me like this." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm trying to move on. Lucas, he's good to me. But it feels like I'm betraying you every time I look at him. I wish you could tell me what to do. I wish you were here." Ethan had to dig his nails into the bark of the tree he was hiding behind to keep from stepping out. He had told himself she had betrayed him, that she had chosen Lucas over him, that she deserved everything he was doing. But in that moment, watching her sob at the headstone carved with his name, a splinter of doubt lodged deep in his chest. What if he had been wrong? Ethan didn't have long to dwell on it. The next day, he found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of his car. "I know what you're doing. Meet me tomorrow. Alone. J. Julia." The note stayed in Ethan's hand long after he had read it. Julia. He hadn't seen her in years. Since the funeral, maybe longer. The only memory that surfaced was of her hugging Claire at the graveside, both women clinging to each other for strength. He didn't know what she wanted now or how she knew what he was doing. But she knew. Ethan stood in the dark alley behind the abandoned train station the next evening, his back pressed against the crumbling brick wall. The wind bit through his coat, carrying the distant hum of the city. "Ethan." He turned sharply. Julia stepped out from the shadows, her face pale in the moonlight. She had changed too, older, sharper around the edges. But her eyes, they were the same. "You're alive," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't act surprised," Ethan said coldly. "You're the one who left the note." Julia stepped closer, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets. "I didn't know for sure until now, but I hoped... God, Ethan, you should have come back. You should have told Claire." His jaw tightened. "Claire doesn't deserve to know. Not after what she did." Julia flinched as though he had struck her. "You really believe that?" "I saw the texts, the photos, Lucas and Claire." "Stop." Julia's voice cut through the night air, sharp as glass. "You think a handful of messages you barely understand is proof Claire betrayed you? You think she was part of what happened to you?" Ethan's chest burned. "I don't think, Julia. I know. She's with him now. She's marrying him. Julia shook her head slowly, her breath clouding in the cold air. You're wrong, Ethan. And if you'll let me, I can prove it. But you have to listen. They found a coffee shop that stayed open late, empty except for the barista scrolling on her phone behind the counter. Julia slid into the booth opposite Ethan, wrapping her hands around the cup of coffee like it was a lifeline. You don't know what it was like for her after the accident, Julia began softly. She wasn't just grieving, Ethan. She was destroyed. I stayed with her for weeks, and there were days I was afraid I'd find her. Julia swallowed hard. That I'd find her gone. Ethan stared at the table. He had imagined Claire moving on quickly, but the picture Julia painted didn't fit that narrative. She wouldn't leave the house, Julia continued. She barely ate. She couldn't say your name without breaking down. And Lucas, he saw it as an opportunity. He was patient. He played the savior until she didn't have the strength to resist him anymore. Ethan's hands tightened around his coffee cup. You're saying he manipulated her. I'm saying Lucas has wanted Claire since the day you met her, Julia said. He hated being second to you. And when the accident happened, he took everything. Your best friend, your place in her life, your future. Ethan's mind churned. It was easier to hold on to his anger, to the image of Claire as a traitor. But Julia's words were like cracks forming in a dam. Julia reached into her bag and slid a small flash drive across the table. This is the first thing you need to see, she said. Security footage from the night of the accident. It took me years to get it. Ethan plugged it into his laptop. Grainy black and white images filled the screen. His car pulling away from the reception hall, the dark outline of another vehicle following close behind. That's Lucas's car, Julia said quietly. He made sure you'd be alone. He sabotaged the brakes on your car earlier that day. And when you crashed, he was the first one on the scene, not to help you. The footage jumped forward. Lucas standing by the wreckage, his face calm, his phone pressed to his ear. Then he stepped back as another man, a stranger, appeared, leaning into the car where Ethan's broken body lay. That's the man Lucas hired to finish what the accident didn't, Julia said. But the police showed up sooner than expected, and he bolted. Lucas told everyone you were already gone. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. He had spent years imagining the accident, replaying it in his head, telling himself Claire had been part of it. But seeing Lucas on that screen, untouched by guilt as he orchestrated the end of his life, was a truth he couldn't unsee. Why are you showing me this now? Ethan asked hoarsely. Because you're going to ruin Claire if you keep going like this, Julia said. You've been hurting her, haven't you? Making her think she's in danger, making her life hell. Ethan said nothing, but the guilt on his face was answer enough. Julia leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. She's already been through hell, Ethan, and she never betrayed you. Lucas isolated her, twisted her grief until she thought he was the only person she could rely on. If you want justice, go after him, not her. Ethan's hands trembled as he closed the laptop. I don't know how to face her now. God, Julia, I almost killed her. Then make it right, Julia said. Stop the cycle before it's too late. Lucas is careful, but he's not untouchable. He's running money through offshore accounts, using his company's IPO to launder it. I've been collecting evidence for years, waiting for someone who could finish it. That's you, Ethan. Ethan lifted his gaze, the rage in his chest shifting into something sharper. I'll need more than a flash drive, he said. You'll get it, Julia promised. I have bank records, shell company data, and there's the man Lucas hired to kill you. He's alive, hiding. I can find him. Ethan's breath caught. If we get him to testify, Lucas won't see the inside of a church again, let alone a boardroom. Julia finished. They left the coffee shop together, the plan already taking shape in Ethan's mind. But when Julia touched his arm before they parted ways, her expression softened. One more thing, she said. Whatever happens, don't punish Claire anymore. She doesn't deserve it. And if you ever forgive her, tell her I was the one who made you see the truth. Ethan nodded, throat tight. As Julia disappeared into the night, Ethan stood on the sidewalk, the flash drive a weight in his pocket. For the first time in years, he wasn't driven by blind hatred. Now he had a purpose. Ethan's apartment became a war room. The walls were plastered with documents Julia had gathered over the years, bank statements, shell company records, tax filings that didn't match. Lucas's face stared back at him from a dozen photos, the man's carefully curated image of power and charm hiding the rot underneath. This is bigger than just laundering money, Julia said, pointing at a string of companies linked to Lucas's tech firm. He's been funneling millions through offshore accounts, disguising them as IPO proceeds. If the feds get a whiff of this, he's finished. Ethan nodded, his jaw set. We need to make them look. He's too good at covering his tracks for anyone to take notice on their own. Julia pulled out her laptop. I've been feeding anonymous tips to a financial crimes task force for months. But we need something stronger, a clear trail that ties directly to Lucas. Ethan stared at the map of transactions. What about the man he hired to kill me? If we can find him. Julia's lips thinned. I've been searching. He disappeared after the accident, but I think I've narrowed it down. Word is, he's working small-time jobs under the name Harris in Chicago. Then we go to Chicago, Ethan said without hesitation. 2 days later, they found Harris in the back room of a rundown auto shop, leaning against a workbench with a cigarette between his lips. His eyes widened when he saw Ethan. No, Harris muttered, backing up. No, you're dead. You saw Lucas leave me for dead, Ethan said, his voice cold. But I'm not, and you're going to tell the world what he did. Harris's hands trembled. If Lucas finds out I'm alive, I'm dead for real this time. He'll find you eventually, Julia said quietly. And he won't wait to make sure this time. But if you testify, we can put him away for good. Witness protection. A clean slate. Harris's gaze darted between them. Finally, he nodded. I'll do it. Back in New York, Ethan and Julia's plan began to take shape. They forged a paper trail leading directly from Lucas's company to illegal offshore accounts, planting breadcrumbs for investigators to follow. Julia coordinated with the task force, making sure the evidence landed on the right desks. But it wasn't enough to bring Lucas down quietly. We need to hit him publicly, Ethan said one night, pacing the room. Somewhere he can't wriggle out with his money or lawyers. Somewhere everyone will see. Julia hesitated. You're thinking about the wedding. Ethan's eyes were hard. It's the perfect stage. All of his allies will be there. The press will be there. When the truth comes out, there won't be anywhere to hide. Meanwhile, Claire began to notice cracks in the facade. Lucas had always been attentive, but lately his temper flared more easily. He snapped at her when she questioned business calls late at night, and once she caught him shredding documents in his study. Everything okay? She asked carefully. Of course, Lucas said with a tight smile. I'm just busy. Don't worry yourself. But Claire did worry. She had spent years convincing herself Lucas was the man who had saved her from despair. Yet something in his eyes now felt different, harder. One evening, she found a file left open on his desk, a list of overseas wire transfers. When Lucas walked in, her heart leapt into her throat. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "I was just looking for a pen," Claire stammered. Lucas's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't need to worry about the company. Leave that to me." The final piece of the plan fell into place a week before the wedding. Julia handed Ethan a folder thick with evidence. "This is everything," she said. "Bank records, shell companies, Harris's testimony. When we release it, Lucas will be finished." Ethan stared at the folder. He thought of Claire, of the fear he had put her through, of the night she had wept at his grave. "She'll hate me when she finds out what I've done," he said quietly. "Maybe," Julia said softly, "but she'll understand. And you can tell her yourself when the time is right." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. On the morning of the wedding, the city buzzed with anticipation. The ceremony was set to be a grand affair, a spectacle of wealth and romance. Reporters crowded outside the venue, cameras flashing as guests in designer suits and gowns arrived. Claire stood in the bridal suite, her hands trembling as she adjusted the veil. "You look beautiful," her maid of honor whispered. Claire forced a smile, but her mind wasn't on the dress or the flowers. It was on the strange unease that had settled in her chest for weeks. Something about Lucas felt wrong. Ethan waited in the shadows near the cathedral's entrance, the folder of evidence heavy in his hands. Harris was there too, a nervous wreck in an ill-fitting suit. Julia stood beside Ethan, her hand on his arm. "This is it," she whispered. "Once you step through those doors, there's no going back." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I know." The music began to swell inside, the sound of the organ echoing through the grand hall. Claire was walking down the aisle now, her eyes fixed on Lucas at the altar. Ethan's heart pounded. It was time. The cathedral was breathtaking, every detail designed to impress. Gleaming chandeliers cast warm light on marble floors, polished to a mirror shine. White roses lined the aisle in neat rows, their fragrance filling the air like a promise of purity. But to Ethan, watching from the shadows behind the grand oak doors, it felt like a stage built for a lie. The organ thundered as Claire appeared at the far end of the aisle, her veil cascading behind her like a waterfall of silk. Guests turned to watch, their faces glowing with admiration. Claire walked slowly, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. At the altar, Lucas stood waiting, his smile perfectly measured, his suit tailored to perfection. He looked every bit the man who had it all: wealth, respect, the love of a beautiful woman. Ethan's heart pounded so hard he thought it might give him away. He gripped the folder of evidence tighter, his palms slick with sweat. "Wait until the vows," Julia whispered from behind him. "That's when it'll hit the hardest." Ethan nodded, his eyes locked on Claire. She looked radiant, but there was something in her gaze, a flicker of unease, that twisted his chest. "She deserves the truth," he told himself, "even if it destroys me." The ceremony passed in a blur. Ethan could barely hear the priest's words over the rush of blood in his ears. He watched Lucas slide the ring onto Claire's finger, watched her lips tremble as she whispered the vows she had rehearsed. Then it was Lucas's turn. "I, Lucas Gray," he began, his voice strong and clear, "take you, Claire Bennett, to be my wife, to have and to hold, for better or worse. The great oak doors slammed open with a deafening crack. Gasps rippled through the cathedral as every head turned. Ethan stepped into the light, his presence commanding, the folder clutched in his hand. "I object," he said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Claire froze, her bouquet slipping from her fingers and scattering petals across the marble floor. Lucas's face went white, then red. "Who the hell?" But then he saw Ethan's face. "No," Lucas whispered, shaking his head. "This isn't possible." Claire's knees buckled. "Ethan?" Her voice cracked like a prayer. "I'm alive," Ethan said, walking slowly down the aisle. "And I'm here to stop this sham before it's too late." The guests erupted in whispers, the sound swelling like a storm. Claire stared at Ethan as though she were seeing a ghost. Tears blurred her vision. "You're dead," she whispered. "I buried you. I mourned you for years." "I was left for dead," Ethan said, his gaze never leaving Lucas. "But I survived, and now everyone is going to hear the truth." Lucas recovered his composure, stepping forward with a mocking laugh. "This is insane. He's delusional. Claire, call security. We can't let this lunatic ruin." "Don't you dare finish that sentence," Ethan snapped. He opened the folder and held up a stack of documents. "These are bank records and shell company transfers that prove Lucas has been laundering millions through his company. And it doesn't stop there." He nodded to Julia, who stood at the door with Harris. The man stepped forward hesitantly, his eyes darting around the room. "This is Harris," Ethan said, "the man Lucas hired to make sure I never made it to my honeymoon alive. He was at the crash site. He tried to finish the job. And when he refused to disappear, Lucas tried to kill him too." Gasps and horrified murmurs rippled through the cathedral. Claire clutched the edge of the altar, her face pale. "Tell them," Ethan urged. Harris's voice shook, but it carried through the silence. "Lucas paid me to cut Ethan's brakes. When he survived the crash, he told me to go back and finish it. But the cops showed up. He said it would all be pinned on me if I didn't disappear." Lucas lunged for Harris, but Ethan intercepted him, slamming him back against the altar. "You think you can keep lying your way out of this?" Ethan growled. "I've given the same evidence to federal investigators. By now, your accounts are frozen, your allies are abandoning you, and the only thing you have left is the prison sentence you deserve." Security rushed forward, but it wasn't to help Lucas. 2 federal agents in dark suits entered the cathedral, flashing badges. "Lucas Gray, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, and money laundering," one agent announced. Lucas's face twisted in rage as they cuffed him. "You think you've won, Ethan? This isn't over." "It's over," Ethan said quietly. The agents led Lucas down the aisle as guests parted in stunned silence. Claire stood frozen at the altar, her veil slipping from her head. "Ethan," she whispered again, "all this time, you were alive?" "Yes," he said softly, his voice breaking. "And I let you believe I was dead because I thought you had betrayed me. I hurt you, Claire. I made you afraid, and I will never forgive myself for that." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought I was losing my mind. I thought I was going crazy, feeling like you were still out there somewhere. I missed you every day, Ethan, every single day." Ethan took a step closer, his hands trembling. "I wanted to come back for you. But I didn't know if you'd even want to see me after everything." Lucas made it look like he couldn't finish the sentence. Claire closed the distance between them, her fingers brushing his cheek as though afraid he would vanish. "I would have wanted you," she whispered. "Always." Julia approached quietly, her presence a silent anchor. Claire turned to her, confusion flickering in her eyes. "Julia, you knew?" Julia nodded. "I found out months ago. I've been helping Ethan gather the evidence. He couldn't have done this without me." Claire's lips trembled. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it had to happen this way," Julia said softly. "If Lucas suspected, he would have destroyed everything. And because—" She hesitated. "Because Ethan deserved the chance to fight for you himself." Claire stared at her, tears shining. "You've always been the strong one." Julia smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened. "No, just the one who loves you both enough to let go." The cathedral slowly emptied, guests whispering in shock as they left. Reporters outside swarmed the agents leading Lucas away, cameras flashing like lightning. Inside, Ethan and Claire stood alone at the altar, the world finally quiet around them. "I'm so sorry," Ethan whispered. "For everything. For doubting you. For what I did to you when I thought you'd betrayed me." Claire shook her head, cupping his face in her hands. "We've both suffered enough, Ethan. What matters is that you're here. That this is over." Ethan drew her into his arms, holding her as though he would never let go again. But over her shoulder, he saw Julia standing at the back of the cathedral, her face soft with something that looked like peace. She caught his eye, nodded once, and slipped out the door. Ethan knew then that she had given them this chance at happiness, and that he would never forget it. The cathedral was empty now, the echoes of chaos still clinging to the vaulted ceilings. Claire stood at the altar in her torn wedding gown, the veil gone, the flowers at her feet wilting into brown edges. Ethan stood beside her, unsure if he should take her hand. The silence between them was thick, filled with every unspoken word, every memory of years lost. Finally, Claire looked up, her eyes swollen from crying, but resolute. "What now?" she whispered. Ethan exhaled slowly. "I don't know, but we're free now, and that's a start." The days that followed blurred together. Lucas's arrest dominated every news outlet, his face plastered across screens and headlines screaming about fraud, laundering, conspiracy, and murder. Investors abandoned his firm. Former allies refused to take his calls. And Claire? Claire struggled to process the reality that everything she had believed for years was a lie. She spent hours in her apartment, sorting through the debris Lucas left behind. Unpaid bills, false contracts, letters that now felt like cruel jokes. Every item she touched seemed to echo betrayal. Ethan visited often. He didn't push. He simply sat with her, offering quiet company when she needed it, letting her cry, letting her rage. He knew the pain of betrayal better than anyone. One evening, she asked the question that had been haunting her. "Why didn't you come back sooner?" Ethan hesitated, jaw tight. "Because I thought you were part of it. I thought you chose him." Claire's breath caught. "You really believed I could do something like that?" "I didn't want to," Ethan admitted. "But I saw messages, photos, things Lucas made sure I'd find. He wanted me to hate you. And I did. For too long." Claire wiped at her tears. "I mourned you every day. I thought Lucas was saving me from drowning. But now I see. He was dragging me deeper." Ethan reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm sorry for doubting you. I'm sorry for everything." But I promise, I'll never let anything come between us again. Julia visited the next day. She stood in the doorway, unsure. I just wanted to see how you're both holding up, she said softly. Come in, Claire said, pulling her into a hug. We wouldn't be here without you. Julia smiled faintly. I only gave Ethan the tools. He's the one who fought. That's not true, Ethan said, stepping closer. You're the reason I could see clearly again, and the reason I could come back to her. Julia's eyes glistened. I love you both. That's why I'm leaving New York. I need to find out who I am outside of this story. Claire shook her head, tears welling again. You're family. You always will be. Julia hugged her tightly. Just be happy. That's all I want. Ethan stepped forward. We'll never forget what you did for us. Julia smiled, her voice steady though her tears fell silently. I know, and that's enough. She left quietly, the door closing softly behind her. Weeks turned into months. The trial came and went, with Harris's testimony sealing Lucas's fate. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Ethan and Claire sat together in the courtroom as the verdict was read, their hands clasped tightly. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight on his chest lift. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. What's next for you two? One shouted. Ethan glanced at Claire, who gave a small smile. We rebuild, he said simply. We heal. Together. Healing wasn't easy. There were nights Claire woke from nightmares, convinced Lucas was still out there. Ethan would hold her until the trembling stopped. There were days Ethan was haunted by the pain he had caused Claire during his vendetta. She would cup his face in her hands and whisper, We're here now. That's what matters. Little by little, the wounds began to close. Months later, they visited Julia in a quiet coastal town. She looked lighter, freer. Seeing her happy gave them a peace they didn't know they needed. And then, one evening, Ethan and Claire returned to the hill where they had once planned to build their first home. The old foundation was still there, weathered but strong, just like them. We could start here, Ethan said softly. A fresh start. Claire leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. I'd like that. He wrapped his arms around her as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky painted in shades of crimson and gold. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a promise. And as they stood there, ready to rebuild, their journey left behind a lesson we can all carry with us. Life will test you in ways you can't imagine. It will break you, twist you, make you believe you're alone. But the truth always finds a way to the surface. Ethan and Claire's story proves that love can survive even the darkest storms, that forgiveness can mend what hatred tried to destroy. And Julia's quiet sacrifice reminds us that sometimes the purest form of love is letting go. So if you're listening now, take a breath. Look at the people who matter to you. Tell them what they mean to you, because you never know when the chance might be taken away. Hold on to love. Fight for it. And when the time comes, be brave enough to forgive.